Thank you, Jayhan. I had a lovely intro, and it was a clip because I was talking with a muted mic. Thank you for saying something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to your evening Monday night Neurofeedback and Chill. I'll be your host, Dr. Andrew Hill, your neuroscientist for the evening. If you're new or if you're watching this later, please feel free to give a like and subscribe, leave comments, participate live if you're live with us here tonight. I see a few folks are wandering in already. Thank you for Jayhan for alerting me to the fact the microphone was off. It's always something. So I have a cat here insisting on lots of attention. She's not in frame, but she's insistent. So I'll have to get distracted. But tonight we're talking about one channel versus two channel training. Classical neurofeedback, traditional neurofeedback, is done with sequences of individual segments of training, where you might do one channel for the whole 30 minutes and do 2 or 3 frequency bands within that channel, or you might do sets of one channel training protocols where you sequence them, and that creates a certain type of effect I want to talk about. And you also might do a 2-channel training, which can have a couple of variants. One of them is a sum training where you're adding together the channels before measuring the brainwaves or the bands. And the other would be dual channel or some sort of contingent channel training where you are training 2 things at once. Often tying together the rewards, you have to move potentially 6 or more brainwave parameters to get the thing to move. So I'm guessing you guys can hear me now, right? You can verify that. Let me know. And I think I'm going to set up a 2-channel training protocol and talk a little bit about 1 channel versus 2. There's been this elaboration. The field of neurofeedback is probably about 60 years old. And there's been this elaboration all along towards a little bit more sophisticated tools of assessment as well as of training. But the ability to train the brain in some ways has outpaced our ability to understand brain training. And so often very, very complex systems, I talked about this last week a little bit, systems like Loretta based training, which is a way of doing source analysis on the full head EEG in real time, training to the QEEG database norms. I don't do that. I use the QEEG to understand the brain and then train individual resources. And I think that that's probably the best way to do some sort of training, is to kind of understand somebody from the data, but don't assume the data is perfect, and don't assume that average is typical, or rather typical is better because it's average in some way. So that's the problem with using brain mapping as a training guide instead of a information guide. So the map is not the territory, the brain map is not the person, and you can understand somebody by looking at their brain map or their executive function performance testing. But it doesn't mean you should train to the middle of the bell curve when it comes to the brain mapping. So when deciding what to go after, there's often multiple goals in the brain maps, in their particular suffering or goals, or what success looks like for them. And you should think first of all about how the brain is built a little bit and how the basic resources need to be addressed. You probably shouldn't be doing deep work around creativity or flow state while there's major anxiety, for instance, because you'll drop someone into their crap. The same is true potentially of strong executive function work. You can maybe have to sequence that with anxiety work, depending. So think a little bit about how the brain is dysregulated, where the deepest sources of support might be. Think of the 3 legs of the stool: sleep, stress, and attention. And as you start to address those things, you'll find the whole system regulates. So often when doing a sequence of training across a couple of months, I'll start with doing individual segments of protocols sequenced within a single session. And then over time, I'll move to compound protocols, dual protocols, or sum protocols, depending. And these have different impacts in the brain slightly, and are maybe stronger in some ways. They're definitely different in some ways. And there's conditions where you may want to use a sum or a dual, or a difference, which is a 2-channel protocol that you can do. And there's times when you might not want to do 2-channel or when sequencing makes sense. Now, sequencing is something that you can do with regards to sets of protocols. So you might do an SMR, classic training protocol for 30 minutes, or you might split it and do 15 minutes of an alpha reward and then 15 minutes of a beta or SMR. And I find this a very classic way to train. Now, one of the benefits of doing sequences is they're short enough that you can start to swap in different segments of that sequence to figure out what might be useful. So if you know you're getting good effects from an executive function protocol, but there's some unresolved sleep issues, you can play with, trying like a C3 beta versus a CZ SMR to see how sleep responds once you know that your C4 SMR, classic ADHD protocol, is working well. Very easy thing to do. For most people, most clients, most people who are self-experimenting can find what works that way. And what you do is you do the SMRs and betas, and then you watch how the executive function and sleep respond. And you can use sort of a perspective. It used to be called the arousal model, this perspective of alpha as neutral, beta as active, fast beta as faster active, delta as inactive, theta as transitional. And the arousal model also takes into account the idea of developmental change or the brain speeding up across time in alpha. You can look at the peak alpha frequency, things like developmental difficulties, aging, brain injury, deep fatigue or illness can drag down some of the speeds. You have to take that into account. This is where the idea of individualized optimal reward frequency, the IORF, came from. And this is before the time of infra-low or infra-slow training, that this was all kind of dialed in based on the speed of the alpha. But the arousal model was pretty successful at working with many populations, including sleep, ADHD, substance use disorders, and autism, and anxiety. And it became kind of a bread and butter for a lot of how the field works. I still work in a lot of ways towards what I would consider the arousal model or the activation model of the brain. I have a little bit of a laterality model laid on top of it or informing it, because I worked in a laterality brain lab and sort of did a lot of both developing ideas and assessing how attention and other systems work in each hemisphere separately. So my arousal model, if you will, is laid across the hemispheres, and I think about hemispheric dominance and laterality and things like that. So in doing sequences, sometimes you think about, again, how the brain is built. What are the parts you're actually training? And the other hint about sequence is a simple hint, is that if you end on a protocol, if you do like a 2 times 15-minute set, and you end on something, you're more likely to get a subjective after effect in that second thing. You can also use the second protocol to buffer or tamp down the first protocol. So if you're, again, sequencing things and you know that you have a good C4, it's grounding, it's focusing, you have a good frequency dialed in, then do something different before it, an alpha training, a beta training, and you can test an idea with something that's a bit different, and C4 training after that, or SMR training in general, will act like a bit of gravity. It'll tamp down any after effects. So you can kind of use these sequences intelligently in that way, and you can use the sequences in order and in combination based on which parts of the brain might either benefit from multiply activating or co-activating. Think about in the gym, you might do biceps and triceps because they're opposing resources and they work out well together. You might do C3 beta and C4 SMR for the same reason. Or you might do something around FZ theta down and PZ alpha up for the same reason, that you're doing opposing systems in some ways. So you can think about the systems you're working with, the goals, the brain, and develop a set of parts, a set of segments that you would then start conservatively, train, and dial in the reward frequencies until you're getting the good effects you're looking for. And then for some protocols, you can combine them into 2 channels. Not all protocols work that way. For instance, be very cautious putting one of the big hubs like a temporal lobe, mid-temporal area, or PZ, back midline. Be very cautious about putting one of those areas into a 2-channel training. Because 2-channel is not just more training in 2 at once. It's not like you're doing biceps and triceps at the same time. It's something different. Because 2-channel training either explicitly in many software systems or implicitly because of just the time of rewards. You're training two things to not just individually, but you're training their relationship to each other. You're training this tendency or ability to co-activate and co-regulate and support each other. And you might be creating coherence between them, especially in cases of doing a 2-channel where you have a sum protocol. I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. You'll create a lot of coherence or information flow between the locations. And this can be really, really useful, but you have to know that you're doing it and why. And areas that are homotopic, opposite areas, tend to dual or combine in a difference really well. So you can do like a T5 minus A1 and T6 minus A2 for temporal areas, and you will get a very similar protocol, and that'd be a dual, very similar protocol to a T5 minus T6 in a difference protocol. You might want to set up the frequencies a tiny bit differently, but you can do similar things like that if you need to. Now, when doing things that are not similar, like might be FC minus PZ down the midline and an SMR, you can do those in duals, but you have to sort of, again, think about the tissues you're training, the individual modules you're training. And whenever designing training protocols, it's really important to think about the failure modes as well. So not just about how the brain is built and why attention and sleep are more important than like a sense of, fulfillment or something that you're going after as a goal. I've heard that as a goal for folks. You also have to think about the individual tissues you're training and how they tend to fall over. The anterior cingulate tends to have two big failure modes. It usually has high amounts of theta or high amounts of beta. One of those two. So every so often you'll see low alpha, low neutral tone in those tissues, and that's the thing. But if you look deeper, you'll see relative power in theta driving it, or you'll see coherence in beta driving that. So the failure modes of the tissue become important to know about. The direction they want to train in is back towards their good regulation. Alpha wants to be made at FC minus PZ or FC and PZ. It doesn't want to be made at FC by itself, FC minus A1, let's say. So think about the tissues involved, or the homotopic tissues C3 and C4. You can train those in a dual because they are referential tissues. They are kind of tied together, and you get an effect. If you train at C4 minus A2 even, you actually get a resonance SMR effect at C3. It's very small, but it's there. And so if you do a beta training at C3 and an SMR training at C4 at the same time, it's a very interesting way to make them talk together so that the beta on the left side becomes more interdependent with the SMR on the right. It's a very strong way of stabilizing executive. But you would want to do those things first as segments to dial in the beta frequencies on the left and the SMR on the right and figure out what feels good, what works well for sleep onset, sleep maintenance, and for executive function before bringing that dual on board, because you're much more likely to create side effects if you do the wrong frequencies and segments with a dual. Once you have the right frequencies and segments, you may be able to go for it. Again, think of the failure modes. You might not want to dual something that doesn't normally happen. If you're doing a PZ minus A1, it doesn't do a lot of other things besides make tons of robust alpha. And it doesn't make theta changing that much or beta change that much at PZ, honestly. I mean, beta is usually in the way a little bit, but the robust alpha production is what PZ mostly does, the parietal posterior cingulate cortex. This area tends to want to make alpha and doesn't do a lot of other big shifts. And so if you dual it up, let's say with a C4 SMR, you don't create good behavior at the PZ minus A1. Instead, what you create is the PZ minus A1 adopting the other half of the training protocol. So if you combine PZ A1 alpha with C4 minus A2 SMR training in a dual, PZ would start to pick up the SMR and create the beta waves because it's one of the failure modes of PZ, of the posterior cingulate, is to get stuck in beta, become threat sensitive, become ruminative, fearful. So you wouldn't want to risk that. But ironically, C4 minus PZ, you can reward low beta, 12 to 15, 11.5 to 14.5, usually pretty well. It's a little activating, but it doesn't create this surge of fast alpha and slow beta. Probably because the C4 is much more willing, much more likely to make low beta SMR than PZ is to make the fast alpha, same frequency range, that would be uncomfortable. So you can think about the tissues you're training. People often think that when you're doing 2 electrodes in the head and subtracting them, C4 minus PZ, you're subtracting just the summed or the subtracted signal. But there's individual behavior of the tissues underneath those locations that have to be taken into account. And they will contribute to the subtracted signal or the measured signal very differently depending on where the wires are. So in summary, the sequences have to be sequenced properly and the sums have to be summed to things that need to be tied together. Sorry, the duals, the 2 channels. Hey, Radar Ashwood, I was ranting there. Hope you came in and heard my rant about 1 channel versus 2. Hope you guys can hear me. I'm going to set myself up for a quick session, then talk a little bit more about sum versus dual. Let me go and do that right now. Move myself off to the side. So do you guys do 2-channel training? Do you do segmented training? Do you do sequences, multiple segments? How do you train? I'm curious. Tell me if you're live here. Turn off the title. There we go. All right. So I'm going to go into a client. Let's pick my regular client ID. I'll plan that. And I'm in a situation where I want to do a 2-channel setup. So I want to change my layout to an 8-trace. If you're a Peak Brain client, you don't usually need to do this because we have the 8-trace in its own client ID. Just open that up. So you see here I have a C3A1 and that's a C4A2. Now that's a dual protocol like I was describing. So 4 to 7, 15, 22 to 36, I'm at 24. 4 to 7, 12 to 15, 22 to 36, make that 34. And then just knowing my brain and my response to neurofeedback, I know that I shouldn't train C4 minus A2 and C3 minus A1 at these full hertz, so to speak, these full frequencies. I know my brain and many people's brains will do a little better at 14.5 and 17.5 on the left and 11.5 and 14.5 on the right. So I'm just dropping the reward bands by 1/2 of 1 hertz. And that's something I will have learned. You will learn if you're working with clients or yourself. You'll learn because you will have felt the frequencies before. A 12 hertz can feel very different than an 11.5 hertz, for instance. That isn't true for everyone. Many people can get away with being 1/2 a hertz off. Other people will, feel a 1/4 hertz very strongly or even feel an 1/8 of a hertz. EEGer allows you to turn on an 1/8 of a hertz gradations. I have not done that. All right, how long is this set up for? This is 20 minutes. That's a weird time. Let's do 15. I've been talking already a lot. And auto goal settings, which are the thresholds of reward. We do 25, 65, 15. You can see there's a whole bank here of thresholds because we're training 6 things. There's 6 bands being parameterized or measured in real time. And one of the effects of that, of the dual practically when training, is you have to have good clean signals on 2 channels of data. And you'll see it's a bit harder to get going sometimes. I'm just predicting. And 2, the brain has to move twice as many things to get rewards, the way EEGer at least is set up. It's contingent duals. All 6 conditions have to be met. And that means that you'll get half. I'll probably get half as many or 2/3 as many rewards. And I'll still have an auto goal. So every 30 seconds, it'll adjust next to where I am. And that looks pretty good. Just double checking. Always double check. Always double check. Always look for the mistake. Always assume there is one. I'm working on ways of making this less error prone, the manual setup for all those people that use EEGer. If you use EEGer, give a shout out. Give me a comment below. Say hello. Let me know how long you've been using EEGer for. It's really old software. Have you been using EEGer since it had a different name? Do you know what the name was before it was called EEGer? Cool points to anyone who can give the name to the previous software that was the previous iteration of EEGer that ran on DOS back in the day. All right, that's all set up properly. I'll go back and hang out with you guys and answer questions while I'm putting wires on. Oh, the video's choppy, really? Let's see. Oh, it says drop frames. I can see the drop frames. It says I have 18K. My internet was super awesome before I connected. Thanks for the quality check, guys. I don't know why my my connections are slow. I can see the slow video. Let's give it a second to catch up here. Okay, it says it's dropping frames at 12%. Wait for the YouTube streaming to catch up, I think. It does need SMR KAO. That does deserve all the lols. Yep. So hey guys, hey L Chad. My guess is it's better now. I can see my drop frame rate just dropped away. I can see my internet speed is back to being fast. I think this is my little tiny computer overheating. It's pretty hot in my apartment. That just means I'm going to need to set up a different machine. The stuttering's gone now. I'm guessing you guys can hear me again nice and smoothly. Let me know. Cool. I'm going to set myself up for a session shortly now for that C301, C482. So we're going to use it's normal again. Thanks, El Chad. Appreciate it. We're going to use a little UWiz amp. This is a 4-channel amp. I'm going to use 2 of these channels, and that's going to be set up as red minus black as channel 1, blue minus white as channel 2, and then the green socket is the ground. So if you're holding a Wiz amp like you can see it, you have that first channel set right there, the second channel is right there, and the ground's in the middle. It would only use the other sockets if you're using channels 3 and channels 4, which is a bit weird. So yeah, El Chat, I think my little computer needs help. It was running its fan for a second right when that internet drop frames message was showing up. All right, got some electrolyte paste here. Let's put some wires on. Oh, I didn't actually grab the proper wires, but I'll show you a trick and I'll work around that. So first of all, I'm going to put some ear clips on. I got 2 of them. And typically you would want to use 3 ear clips for this protocol. Actually, do I have 3? No, I have 3 flat wires and I have 2 clips, which is great. It's enough to do my 2-channel protocol. I'm going to take my blue and my black wires, which are clips, and I'm going to put them in my ground socket and in my left. Do I do it this way? I guess I do. My left ear, and so I'll put those on. Here's a question. Radar is asking, what sort of EEG patterns do I see in people who are prone to anger and rage? Great question. So anger is often, not always, and remember whenever we think about, what do you see when, or what does this mean? I always answer towards what is likely or often or plausible, not what is true for every person. So just because your QEEG shows something I'm going to mention doesn't mean that the experience is true for you. But the phenotype level difficulty, the pattern I would expect to see if someone deals with a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of negativity, will generally be activation on the right front side of the head. F8, maybe FT8, maybe F4. There's an avoid system there, and it tends to get super activated when you're feeling negative or depressed, and more lateralized right at FT8, frontotemporal 8, right behind F8. I call that site the problem child, because that feels like, if you've done a brain map with me, you've learned that I associate the cortical modules with little characters who sit in the brain. The stabilizer on the left, the supervisor on the right for the precentral C areas. The CEO in the front, or the project manager, the lifeguard in the back for the cingulates, the princess in the P for the right tempoparietal. And right at FT8, we have the problem child. At right front, we have the grumpy old man who's the avoid, go away. And front left, we have the approach. Hi, what's up? I want some. I want to do it. You know, all these systems work and others work in concert to create our experience of moving through the world and using our brain. And when that right front corner is too activated and stays activated, it creates a void that's pretty strong. A negativity bias, a sense of things being difficult. And when it's really strong, you'll have the F8 or FT8 area involved with strong beta. There's also a phenomena radar, and I'm not sure if this is related, but there's something called decorticate rage, where you can lose parts of the lateral areas in the front there, and it can create disinhibited anger. In fact, if you can think about the first neuropsychology inadvertent patient, Phineas Gage, who blew a railroad spike up into his head in the late 1800s, I think, and went from being the sweetest person to angry, irascible, massive personality change, angry, again, like you said. So the right front area is involved, and either it's too active or disconnected, and you end up with the left having a hard time managing the positivity, and it creates this response. Now, that's true, I would say, irritability and anger and negativity. There's other phenomena that can be related to it, like being too tired to be patient or anxious. Making sure my cat wasn't stuck in the door. If you're really anxious, really tired, you can get really brittle, really reactive, really short with people, frustrated, fearful. Those are more in the back of the head, the outside world in the back of the head. So it's fearful, if it's ruminative, that can manifest as fear. Anger is often a fear response, and that's more in the back, posterior cingulate. But the negativity bias, the frustration, the anger, this is going to suck, screw you, that's the right front for many people. Yeah. So I think that answered your question. Let me put the rest of my wires on. I have ear clips on, a ground and a reference. The reference is for C3 for left side, so I'll put that on next. And then I'll put C4 on the other side. And I'll use M2 to cheat. So let's see. C3 and C4 are about there. Let's see. Yeah, it's about right. That's my C3. So I see a few clinicians and trainers on the page here, self-trainers at least. How many of you guys use EEGer or have used EEGer? And do you love it? Like I love it? No pressure to answer the same way. All right, now I need a C4. It's going into the blue socket. Try to make it symmetrical if we can. Let's find C3. Let's do this out of the corner of my eye. There we go. I've got a camera, but I'm also looking at an angle at my screen. All right, so now I got everything except I only have 4 wires on. I still need a reference, an A2. And this is not what I would recommend unless you're doing it in a pinch. I happen to know this protocol works fine for me. So I'm doing C4 minus A2. The notorious KAO. You've used EEGer in the past, and it was effective. Cool. I like EEGer. Actually, am I going to use an ear clip or like a fake? Let's see. Maybe I can just stack them. That will work sometimes as well. Electrically, this can cause a lot of noise, and so we may discover a little trick. So that's one trick that might work. What I've done is I've taken the second one and I've placed it so it's going to be in contact. I'm going to stack them. Jay Han is saying, love EEGer, but it can be hard to access all of the functions or features, hard to know what's available even. It is. It's also a little bit locked down sometimes. When you get a regular clinical copy, you often don't get all of the features. Like you don't get the double-blind placebo module. You might not get the 4-channel multivariate coherence training module a la Rob Coben. You do generally get a bunch of modules by default. But it's, I think, the world's best alpha theta and the best single and 2-channel training. KAO says, I agree, Jayhan. I switched to find more support with figuring out what was available to me as far as functions. Yeah, the training is difficult. I would encourage you guys that are a little frustrated with the EEGer to keep looking within it and to ask questions and take courses with EEG Spectrum. But also, where EEGer really excels is if you're good at brain mapping and digging into the EEG, the raw EEG, EEGer gives you basic tools to set up basic protocols if you know what it is you want to do. And so I say that you kind of have to know what it is you're already doing before you know where to set it up in EEGer. But once you know, it gets out of the way and lets you do it. Radar Ashwood is asking, what are some EEG patterns that don't tend to respond well to neurofeedback? EEG patterns. If somebody's got beta excesses because of large amounts of benzos, that's not a pattern that changes because the benzos are blunting. Also, you can see sometimes there's a drug called buspirone, but the drug itself will blunt, and so you'll see right front theta that you're trying to go after for irritability or mood, and it won't change for some people very easily because of the drug, buspirone. I don't know if the EEG patterns themselves are resistant to change in general. I'm not sure if I would characterize anything I've ever tried to change as resistant. I mean, we're tapping into basic learning processes, associative learning, and almost everything at the cell level is going to learn in that way. Let's learn and see if my makeshift reference is going to work here against the ground or not. All right, run. And we're going to have all kinds of signals, hopefully. Let's just run with v-dot mazes. Okay, got some initializing signals. Here we come. Wow. Maybe. Yeah, we actually have a better signal on A2 than we do on A1. The right side is getting a better, cleaner signal. Let me figure out my left side here. I'm just going to tighten it up. Maybe. Yeah, I got a lot of noise on my C3. Maybe it's my left ear here. Squeeze it. It's a little better. I'm going to give it a second to warm up. Let's see which wire it is. The green wire. I'm going to spin it in the socket. Move the amp a little bit. That can help sometimes. Yeah, so clearly my C4A2 worked just fine. But my... it's a good signal. The second signal is really good. The top one's noisy, really noisy. It's got a lot of EMG in it. Let me see if it's the amp picking up something different. Could be a broken. Oh, there we go. So I'm not exactly sure why I spun the amp. I spun the wires in their sockets. I think one of the wires might be a little bit iffy, and now my signals have dropped away. All of that super high frequency noise. And that high frequency, high amplitude noise is not brainwaves. It's a sign of a bad connection to my scalp. And the amplifier is trying to bridge across that. And instead of picking up brainwaves, it's picking up 60 hertz noise on top of the brainwaves, basically. So now you can see I have two channels. The top one here is my C3A1. The second one is my C4A2. Then I have three frequencies. You can see I have my, get that over back up to the left. Whoops, don't move that. Let's leave that there. Let's move me. So we have my 4 to 7 there. Just I'm going to cover myself. 4 to 7 trace is my theta brainwaves. 4 to 7. And then we have 14 and a half, and that's my beta. I'm rewarding. And then 24 to 36, and then 4 to 7, 11 and a half, and 22. And you can see on the second column over from the right, we have an AVG, or average. And that's the amount of brainwaves. And so as I go down, you can see this is my, let me scale this for a second. Let's do an F9, and then an F11, and then an F9 to scale it. There we go. It's still a little bit noisy, my C3 channel, but I'm going to go for it. It's okay. And so what's happening is I'm measuring brainwaves moment to moment. That's the AVG. The average amount of my theta is 19 microvolts. My beta on the left is 10 microvolts. My high beta on the left is 17 microvolts. My theta on the right is 17, etc. And for bands that are marked INHB, inhibit, whenever the average, the AVG number, is below the threshold, the THR number, which is also those lines outside the band, that will allow the game to run, or the rewards to happen. And whenever I have bursts of brainwaves outside of an inhibit band, it'll stop the game. And whenever I have dips of amplitude within the reward range, it'll stop the game as well. So all 6 things have to be moving. So let me start off the system here, F5 to begin. If you ever forget F5. There we go. Where's my audio? Oh, the audio is pointed someplace else. Let me point it here so you can hear it and so I can get some training in actually. Change my audio to the USB. Oh, it is. These are no rewards. There it goes. That's what it was. I just had noise in the channel and I wasn't getting beeps. Once I stop moving around, it'll settle back down, I'm sure. There we go. Yep, cool. But you see how infrequent the beeps are, right? And I'm not training. Let me actually make the artifact rejects a bit wider. That's one trick, is you always want to make your artifact rejects twice the size of the signal when the eyes are open and 3 times the size of the signal when the eyes are closed. I'm just going to go to 100 because I'm sitting still enough to not add huge blinks or anything to this. And so what I'm doing is cheating a little bit. I'm letting it let some movement through. F11 once more. Cool. So for those of you who are using EEGer or have used EEGer and you forget what a key does, you forget how to adjust, or you forget how to move to the next segment or anything else, hitting F1, let's see, is it going to work? Let's hope this doesn't shut the machine off. Back to EEGer, F1. Yeah, hitting F1 brings up this menu of all of the EEGer keyboard bindings and keyboard commands. And hitting it once more will show you a second page of commands, and hitting it one more time will close this. So if you ever forget, you can bring this up if you're in session. Now, if you hit F1 and EEGer's not running a session, it's just open, the F1 will not bring up the keyboard commands. Instead, it will open up the manual, the PDF manual, so you can search through. But that can be really useful when you forget what a particular key is that you haven't touched in a while. It can bear fruit to spend a moment or two studying this screen when you need to, if you're an EEGer user. So let me hit F1 again. F1. And then again. Back to my game. KAO says, glad to hear I'm not the only one struggling with patients on buspirone. Frustrating. It is. Treat it like ADHD. Pretend the theta is your enemy. Pretend the theta is the real big culprit. Forget the alpha beta asymmetries. Forget the speeds. Focus on the theta. That's my advice there. It's the thing that's being resisted by the buspirone most aggressively, especially if it's right front, F4. See what you see. Triona Bateman. Hi, Triona. Can you talk more about the difference between front theta on the right side versus the left side? Sure. The anger related to the right side was helpful to hear. Does the left side theta relate to depression? Sort of, yeah. My little thing to stick in your head is that mood doesn't have a thermostat. So mood is a hard thing to see in an EEG or dysregulated QEEG. But you can see things that mood is the experience of mood might be driven by. And that can show up as slowed alpha speed. That can also show up as frontal asymmetry. More often than not, that's a left-sided driver of that asymmetry. When that shows up, you typically see left front alpha or left front theta excess. If it's alpha alone, especially if it's right at F4 or F7, it's likely to be maybe pure mood stuff. If it's theta, there's probably a mood component to it. If it's front left theta, F4, F6, F8, AF4, FC4, sorry, 3, AF3, F7, F5, left side, left front corner. Left front corner theta is more likely to be related not just to straight mood, but also to a sense of motivation, and also someone for whom their motivation and attention and mood all kick into gear under pressure or intensity, but maybe they don't as well. It's almost like having inattentive ADHD of the mood when you have large amounts of theta. Again, little kids inside of our brain or little characters. And the front left is a little kid in the porch going, hi, yay, hi, what's up? Hi, can I have it? Come here, hey, come here. And it's a little annoying, but it's super excited to get into things, to learn things, to get its hands dirty, doesn't care about effort at all, enjoys sort of sinking its teeth into new experience and effort. So it's a great area to have under our control because we can use it as we wish. And remember, even the avoid area isn't a bad area to have. We need to balance the approach versus the avoid based on how safe and interested and rested and everything else we feel, so we can approach the world appropriately and not be blind or blasé or too fearful. So the approach versus avoid balance, the happy kid in the porch on the left and the grumpy old man on the right should be out there playing checkers together, balancing each other's tendencies, so when the world walks by, you deal with it appropriately. Having lots of theta on the left is like our little kid is inside, and I don't want to go outside and play, it's too hard, leave me alone. An effort of the mood is the big place you'll notice the difficulty. I want to say one more thing, Triona, about the right front theta and KAO, about the right front theta. If you see right front theta, there's another character that I've been ascribing significance to. These are all just phenotypes, right? But I'm giving them character names because they help us think about them. And I think about the right front as the dread pirate theta. The right front theta is not just a feeling of negativity, which is often beta excess. The failure mode of the right front is beta typically. Low alpha, high beta. That's the typical pinch mode. And if you see that, you might expect depression or anger or irritability at F4, at F8, at FT8. As I mentioned, the problem child lives at FT8. But F4 through F8 is more of the avoid system, and you'll see beta excess there as a sign of the mood being irritable or low or negative, especially with left front involved with the asymmetry. But if you see theta elevated on the right front, instead of classic depression, again, the dread pirate Robert, so the dread pirate theta, you can see my movie tastes, the dread pirate theta, it's a feeling of dread, a feeling of overwhelm, a feeling of being frozen up by your anxiety. It is not a quick and buzzy worry. It is not an anxiety rushing around and chewing on things. It is a frozen overwhelm, a sense of bracing against things being nearly impossible and being really overextended. And almost everyone, I describe the phenomena as dread, it really resonates. So right front theta. And I think Buspar is often prescribed to people that have that kind of mix of what we might have called 50 years ago agitated depression, which is, my perspective, is anxiety leading to depression. So I would target it as atypical depression. Think of the theta as more important than classic betas or alphas. And maybe see if you can get a brain map done at 1 half-life. I forget what the half-life of Buspar is. I think it's pretty long. And since it's a blood level drug, it doesn't actually wash out quickly. You can train through it, but you're going to have to hammer away at that right front. All right, enough about your right front client. Radar Ashwood is asking, in your opinion, does neurofeedback need to be subject to more regulation? I would say more rigor, more scientific analysis, more systemization. I don't think more regulation, because it's kind of like saying, do you need more regulation with workout equipment or kettlebells? I think that we need more education about the brain. I think we need more ability to systematize and track and control what we do in neurofeedback, because as any of you here who do neurofeedback know, or have read horror stories on Reddit, if the loop breaks down where the provider's not listening to the client or asking the client's not letting them know that adverse effects are happening, or the provider's not skilled enough to adjust and kind of works off of a recipe book or 10 or 20 protocols provided by their mentor, that's not a great way to train. And so there's a lot of failure points when it comes to communication, but I would argue that is not something that needs to be legislated or regulated, because I don't think neurofeedback is really the practice of psychology or medicine. I think it's a lot closer to fitness. And I think you can work out wrong and you can injure yourself and you can, do lots of things. Traditional neurofeedback for many, many people is actually fairly safe. And I think products like the Muse have proven that. We haven't seen huge amounts of side effects reported from those devices. I don't think they're as tailored or as flexible, and that means they're less effective, but it should mean there's more side effects coming out as well. And I don't think that's true. I just think they're a bit weaker in general. I also think neurofeedback tends to be when it's one of the forms that's not more invasive, like lens or one of the microstimulation technologies, PEMF, maybe infralow or infraslow, but it's not one of those, when it's traditional neurofeedback, like the field is used for 60 years. The effects are slow. And so you have this phenomena where if people start getting adverse effects, sleep disrupted, feeling on edge after a session, they might drop out. So there is sort of a self-limiting of negative effects in a practical sense historically. You learn as a practitioner to quickly work around those phenomena and to use the experience of changes in sleep and stress and attention and other goals to guide what you're doing and to set the client's expectations around tracking those things. It's a feature, not a bug, to get subtle side effects because it tells you you're close. And that can be really, really useful. So I don't think it needs more regulation, but I do think that we are still in the dark ages when it comes to the technology. I mean, it's hard to get technology that works. There's only a few vendors. The software is stupidly expensive. This software is like $7,000 now for clinical licenses. And even for home licenses or clinical leases, it's a couple $100 a month for this software. And I think it's worth it. It does incredible things. And I think it works better than most packages out there. It's why I keep using it. But it's kind of expensive. And I don't feel like the software industry is in the same place as it was when these tools came out. And, we're hurtling towards a time where we'll have better software tools and machine learning to help us pick safer, better protocols for our QEEGs, from our QEEGs, 3D printed QEEGs with saline electrodes you can use to do your own brain maps, open source databases. Like, we're probably there within 5 years, where you can have an intelligent avatar able to digest your physiology and spit out probable neurofeedback protocols, keep track of your effects, and then adjust as you go. I'm working on helping us get there with some practice management software. If you do neurofeedback or you're curious, come get in touch and I'll give you, probably in about 3 months at this point, give you an early access to some dashboard software where you can manage how these things work. But I would argue that neurofeedback is one of many tools, like sleep hacking, like exercise, like meditation, like supplements. And while there is potential for causing trouble, it takes a minute to cause problems in neurofeedback. It's not instant generally. So, maybe I would argue that all of the zapping, all of the active technologies that send electricity or magnetism into the brain, I find those a little bit risky to be used by the consumer. Like, I know people are doing TDCS and TACS, even getting off-label TMS coils sometimes and using them themselves. I think that's a little risky, mostly because we don't know enough to necessarily provide good services, good outcome. I mean, there's a reason in the TMS landscape medically, it's only approved for depression. There's only very few protocols that are used, and psychiatrists that do TMS don't generally, and other medical doctors, don't generally do other protocols that are off-label because we know so little about the brain. With neurofeedback, you have freedom to test, to try, to evaluate, but you can't plow blindly ahead. And some of the systems that self-regulate or automate will create side effects much faster, even with traditional neurofeedback techniques. And systems that cause microcurrent stimulation or do infralow, infraslow can cause side effects much faster. They're also much harder to use. So knowing what to do is kind of a giant nightmare in some of those systems if you're not already an expert. Even band training can be a little complex, but we teach people to do this all the time. I mean, 80% of Peak Brain's clients work from home. We send you equipment, we do remote brain mapping, we teach you to do the EEGer sessions, and then we stay on top of your after effects and help you iterate. And that's plenty of supervision. I don't need to be controlling it 100% for you to get the effects we're looking for most people, for most goals. That isn't true of every flavor of neurofeedback, nor is it true for every person. And there'll always be room for clinicians doing this, but I am a little resistant to the idea that we should be focusing on getting it covered by particular clinical practices and getting it covered by insurance. I think that's actually the wrong direction. And instead, I'd rather that the cost floor keeps dropping. And so that the barrier to entry for doing good QEEGs, getting cheap equipment, doing good training just keeps dropping. I have a lot of people that do neurofeedback because they can, and it's really empowering. And, we charge half of what most providers in the US charge, and we're still expensive. So I love the idea of having more commodity and more easily available hardware, software, smart training systems that can train us with neurofeedback without us having to become the experts in the process ourselves. And I promise that I am working on that project. I'm working to make that a reality so you guys can all do better neurofeedback to yourselves and to your clients. But right now, the field is cutting edge circa the turn of the century, and there's just not a lot of devices. I mean, this company has folded as far as I can tell, and they used to be one of the prosumer devices. There's a good company called Neurobit, but the US is paying whatever it is in tariffs now from Poland to get those amps, import taxes. So everything's getting more expensive. Electrodes, most of the vendors for electrodes, the manufacturers are in China. So we're having to ramp up US production. I'm also not just a US company, I'm global. Check out my short I posted to the YouTube channel earlier today. You can see we have some new locations coming soon. If you want to open a Peak Brain, let me know. It is doable to get mentoring and support directly from me and my team and our coaching team, and to plug into a global coaching team and to become a really thorough part of the Peak Brain family, but to run your own business and not just to be an employee. So we have those brand extensions coming as soon as the software is viable for running practices with a degree of privacy and HIPAA compliance and GDPR and SOAP, notes, everything else you guys need to run your practices. So that'll be out in another month or two. And you guys can let me know what other topics you might want to see for these podcasts in the interim. Radar is agreeing. He feels like the options for neurofeedback are getting worse. Yeah. Someone will crack it. I mean, the ability to develop software, as both El Chatterino and myself can attest to, is getting easier and easier. And so we're able almost at this point to start building commercial level software without becoming software developers. And things are changing so fast in that landscape that even if I just kept piddling along, I'll be able to create neurofeedback software. In fact, I created some EEG software, but then the Whiz company, Pocket Aerobics, not being there meant that, I had spent all my time building on a driver. I built a brand new driver for their amplifier so I could connect to it from my Macintosh. So I've got 100 plus of the Whiz amps at Peak Brain, maybe 130 or 40 or 50. And there's probably several thousand out there. So I think they're still worth using. There's also somebody in the US who has, tons of spare parts and will repair the sockets. The one failure point of the Whiz amps typically is the springs inside the sockets would become loose after several years. And we had to send those back to Australia historically. There was somebody in Vegas who repairs them. And that same person has the UWiz boards as well. Because the UWiz also has another failure point that's specific to the UWiz. The QWiz, which is a big blocky amp that's not in reach, doesn't have very many failure points with the exception of the sockets. But the UWiz line, which is much more narrow, has this as a failure point. This USB connector on the green board inside of it is pretty easily broken off. And so having a USB socket soldered back on is a thing this guy in Vegas can do. So if you have an amp, go to Facebook Marketplace and look for Pocket Aerobics Repair in Vegas, and you'll find this guy. Keep him in business. Maybe he'll keep repairing amps. But my hunch is somebody will eventually reach out to Bruce McMillan and say, hey, can we invest? Can we get the IP? Can we get the plans? Because, I know the cost roughly of running of getting a full, 100 amps built at the factory in, I think Bruce was using one in Indonesia. I know the rough costs. And I know that somebody who wanted to be a player in the neurofeedback space, like if I was a software vendor already, I'd be looking at Pocket Neurobics in terms of acquisition. I'd be saying, hey, can we buy your IP? And then I would go through like a 510K cert process in the US to make the amps legit, get them underwritten properly. But I just think that the company's had some trouble. I know the pandemic was hard. It's already, it's a niche space. And so using, I have one here, using one of these is always an option. This is a pretty good company called Neurobit. And this is the Neurobit Optima. This is a 2-channel variant. We always like the plus variants, which have the auxiliary sockets because we can do HEG. So I spent all this time building out a driver for the Whiz amps, and I was getting the HEG system working pretty well. And then I realized that I couldn't get more new Whiz amps. And I can plug my HEG into the Neurobits here, but I have to kind of rebuild the interface between my HEG software and the amps that we're going to eventually sort of be using all the time now. Thankfully, I was able to get a really comprehensive documentation on the driver details from Heinrich at Neurobit Optima. He's been very supportive of development. A couple of years ago, when we first really went into our much more strong remote push, maybe 6 years ago, 5 years ago, we reached out to Neurobit to see if we can get their amps working because they were really nice, but they didn't yet work with EEGer. And we sent some amps to EEGer. We got Heinrich and Howard Lightstone talking. And within a month or so, they had a driver built out for EEGer specifically. So it's now a sort of first-class citizen. If you're using EEGer, you have to go into, before a certain version, maybe before the current version, you have to go into the investigational devices and check it off. And then you can select the Neurobit Optima as an amplifier, and it works just fine. It's a tiny bit more sensitive to mechanical noise. I find if you're using one at home, it can really help to take a couple of those like silicone bracelets like that are for causes and things and put one around each side that keeps it off of a hard surface, and the vibration of a truck going by won't disturb the signals quite as much. Kind of like what the big blocky Q-Wiz does. It wraps the whole thing in silicone to prevent the vibration from causing mechanical noise in the signal. So... But yeah, Radar, fewer options. I think someone's going to have to maybe me, maybe you, maybe El Chad, going to have to come out with a much more user-friendly, low-cost option. Even BioExplorer is hard to get. It's hard to buy copies of it sometimes. So I don't want, and it's also really, really old at this point and hasn't been updated against current infrastructure. So, computers and programming is not where it was even 5 years ago. And most of the neurofeedback packages haven't been updated in closer to 15 or 20 years in terms of their core actual architecture. So, somebody's going to come along, maybe me, and build out a Rust and TypeScript, rapid prototyped neurofeedback software that won't be super expensive and will be much more accessible. And that will drive down the cost of delivering services. And then someone, maybe me, will do something with AI to do predictive algorithms to suggest what neurofeedback might be most likely to work using certain license bases or, certain knowledge bases that are licensed, or using human supervisors. Your AI should come up with a plan. Your human skilled person should go through and vet it, right? So you can still use people like me to help you fine tune. But I think AI learning from brain maps and from clinical experience like mine, me training an AI to make decisions like me, will get us 80% of the way there, and will drop the largest cost. There's 2 big costs in neurofeedback. 3, really. One is the equipment. 2 is the time spent to review and plan all the protocols. 3 is getting all the information back from the client reliably about what's happening. I'm trying to solve part of 2 and 3 with my new software to do practice management. And I think after that's in place, we will enable AI so that at the practice level, we'll be able to create learning agents to, for your client base, for the kinds of decisions you have made, clinician or person. Here's other decisions that are congruent with that have also, that might work out as well. So I think we can create a training environment, not decision-making, not predicting what to do for neurofeedback and then doing it, but to sort of be like, okay, based on these EEG references and based on this, literature and based on the past 7 clients you've had where you've taken this particular path with your training, do we want to do this with this client? I think that kind of thing, like the skilled assistant, this sort of skilled assistant coach or neurofeedback tech is very, very close to doable right now with technology. And so that plus better software, plus some tracking. And I don't think it'll be more than 2 or 3 years before the accessibility, the clinical software will no longer be a barrier. And maybe by then someone will have launched a low-cost prosumer. There's definitely a gap in the marketplace. Someone needs to launch a 2-channel, 4-channel amp for like a few $100 basically, and they would crush the marketplace because there's nobody doing that. And the cost of manufacture for a 4-channel amp are not $400. They're like $100, $200, something like that, less if you have all the IP already, all the plans, all the code. So the manufacturing costs are relatively low, and somebody maybe who's got some money, not me, should reach out to Pocket Neurobics and offer to buy their IP, bring it in, start manufacturing using 3D printed cases, prefab green boards, and basic assembly, because there is a gap in the marketplace in the US and in Europe for this sort of sub $1,000 amps. And Pocket was, I think, the best quality solution, actually, the best devices. Very rugged, very stable, very high signal quality. Just unfortunately, the company's economics of scale don't seem to have supported them very well. And so, unfortunately, you have to buy something else if you want an amplifier. Let's see. KAO is saying, you Velcro yours to a chair. Yep, a soft leather chair. Yeah, I don't have one in reach, but the Q-Wiz has a little slot in its case, and I use like cotton belts and put them around the back of a chair and hang the amp through that. Or for the, we actually do that for the U-Wiz as well in the office. We put the strap right over them right there. But these actually you can clip to things as well. So the U-Wiz is a pretty good wearable amp. For this one here, I can't touch this one when it's running, so I have to kind of put it down on a desk. And I always use at least 3-foot wires, so it's fine. But there are some things I would change if I was making an amp. So if you got $100,000 or a couple $100,000, you want to launch an amp company and want me to advise and help you design and rebuild an amp company, let me know. I'm down for it. There are, again, gaps in the vertical integration that I want to do for the whole neurofeedback field still. Radar is saying their product was probably too good. They were cheap and lasted forever. Yeah. But also there was, yes, true. But I would say that there were more problems than that. It was often difficult to buy them when you wanted to, and that was not a new problem. In like at least 5 years, maybe 10 years, you would order something and it would wait and it would wait and it would wait and it would show up eventually on a shipping container, and it would be months, maybe, many before you would get your amplifiers. And so it was really hard as a business person to rely on that. And I'm sure that's true for the other big company that used pocket amps for a long time, which was the Learning Company, Pete Van Dusen, brain trainer. And then we are probably the other big company that uses lots of the pocket amps. And then of course, prosumers use them. They're used by EEGer people as well. But you're right. I mean, you have to buy 4 or 5 amps for your office if you're a big office, and that's it. And they last for years. So, I think that, again, there's a sea change, no pun intended, in how manufacturing and everything else is happening. And my hunch is that somebody, maybe Pocket Neurobics, maybe Bruce McMillan, will relaunch with much more efficient fabrication. Maybe he'll set up some sort of like 3D printer and green board fab really inexpensively in Australia or the US, and then have the amps relaunched. I mean, it's decent IP, it's decent engineering. And so I don't think that there's anything preventing those guys from relaunching at some point or somebody else doing something similar. There's not a huge amount of sophistication in the devices. They're very nice. And there are some subtleties in the Wiz devices that are actually really hard to see from the outside. There's all these secret modes where you can turn it on. Like the Wiz devices, even the UWiz that I put down here, it has an EMG mode and a galvanic skin response mode, and this is a little hidden HEG port on it for doing infrared blood flow training. And the QWiz has both PIR and NIR HEG, and I'm pretty sure this is a QWiz board inside of a UWiz because when probing the device, I can put it into NIR HEG mode, even though there's no NIR HEG input on the outside of the device. So the board still thinks it has an NIR header. My guess is there's no connection. But these are not the world's most sophisticated engineering, even though they were probably 20, 30, 40 years ago when they first came out. So somebody needs to jump on that if they are a biohacker who wants to corner a market. There's not a lot of good solutions. And for under $1,000, you could, have a retail product that was an amplifier and a piece of software that was better than anything else out there and probably more profitable if you use current just-in-time manufacturing, low-cost fabs, etc. So some business advice for those biohackers who are watching. Well, guys, thanks for watching tonight. We're a bit past 7 my time, so at a little bit after an hour. Let me know if I can answer more questions for you on specific topics. Please leave comments in this video or others. YouTube loves when you tickle the algorithm, and you can do that by going to a couple of videos and engaging with them, watching them or leaving some comments in them. YouTube really loves if you share the videos out to other platforms, and it brings people in to watch the videos on YouTube. So if you feel so called, go ahead and share one you think is interesting with people on your socials. And otherwise, take care of those brains. We are running the summer special still. So in all the office locations, you can get a half-price brain map that now includes Nova Scotia, West Palm Beach, New York City, St. Louis, Orange County, California, Los Angeles, London, and Stockholm. And so, did I miss one? I might have missed one. A good problem to have. We're soon opening up in a few other locations, it looks like. I'm talking to several people. And so we'll probably open up 3 or 4 other offices later this year alongside the core Peak Brain offices, including one in Portugal that I believe is happening. So if you are interested in doing neurofeedback with us remotely in the US, you can just ask for a remote and we send it to you. If you're outside of the US, you would want to come to one of the offices in London, Stockholm, or in the US to grab equipment to get your brain mapped. So just let us know if we can support you with some neurofeedback or with education. If I can educate you on specific topics, I'll do my best. And we will solve this supply chain issue with EEG amplifiers and get you those things as you need as well if you're doing neurofeedback. So everyone, you guys have a wonderful evening. Take good care of those brains.